culture is where democracy lives or dies because politics always follows the story a nation tells itself. Gavin Newsom knows that politics isn't just policy papers, right? It's not just legislative roll calls. It's about culture, imagery, and the stories people tell each other about who we are and what our country is. And that's why he's been trolling Trump online with these memes, and the effect is working. I mean, you know, this is it's amazing. I mean, they've got over on Fox News, they're sputtering, they're just freaking out. I'm going to get into that in a little more detail in a little bit, but this is the kind of cultural jujitsu that Antonio Gramsci, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, maybe it's Gramsci, imagined. Flipping power by seizing the symbols and frames of your opponent. And it's the kind of thing Democrats haven't really done effectively since the days of LBJ and FDR. Gramsci was in prison in Italy. Mussolini threw him in jail in the 1920s. And he wrote a series in prison called Prison Notebooks about power. He was an Italian Marxist theorist. And he made a point that most political leaders of his era, I would say outside of Mussolini and Hitler, had missed. Well, actually, FDR, I would say, as well understood this. But here it is, that raw political control is never enough. To truly rule with the broad consent of a nation's citizens, Gramsci realized, you have to shape the culture. You have to convince people that your worldview is just common sense, that your version of reality is the only normal, natural way to see the world. He called this cultural hegemony. Churches, schools, newspapers, the songs people sing, the plays they watch, the stories they told, all carry cultural values. And these values are what shapes politics far more than any speech to Congress or Parliament. And if you can win the cultural battle, Gramsci argued, then you'll always win the political one. Now, his ideas didn't stay locked up with him. They passed through post-war European intellectuals, the British cultural theorists of the 50s and 60s, and finally conservatives in the 1990s picked up on this. Newt Gingrich got it. And, the solution was because they were, Gingrich was talking about how cultural Marxism is dominating universities in Hollywood, right? Hey, if you snore now, you're at a heightened risk of requiring a CPAP machine later. So now is the time to stop snoring. And one of the fastest, smartest, easiest ways to stop snoring is Zyppah. Zyppah is the comfortable, doctor-designed mouthpiece that can stop snoring as fast as the first night. Don't be fooled by imitators. Zyppah was proven in a 600-patient clinical trial. And with over 500,000 units sold, Zyppah is the stop snoring device that I trust. No more being nudged awake for snoring. No more sleeping in separate rooms. No more feeling tired and foggy all day due to lack of sleep. Look, this may be your last best chance to solve your snoring problem now or face having to wear a CPAP mask later. Zyppah, that's Happy Z spelled backwards. I want you to try it with my special discount. Get 20% off and free shipping. Visit zyppah.com and use the promo code SNORE. Again, that's promo code SNORE at zyppah.com. So what's their solution? Steal Gramsci's insight and use it to push back. Andrew Breitbart came up with this. He said, politics is downstream from culture, something that Steve Bannon is often quoting. And Bannon turned it into basically a strategy for the Trump White House. Change the story a nation tells itself, control the cultural conversation, and politics will follow. There was just a study that was published recently showing that more people are registering as Republicans now than as Democrats, and most of the people doing so are young men. And why? Because culture is downstream from politics, and culture, the leaders of our culture, the Joe Rogans of the world, the podcasters, the influencers, have been arguing that these real man issues, opposing trans people and attacking the queer community and white privilege and largely white men, of course, all this kind of stuff. And they've been making these cultural arguments, essentially. Richard Nixon understood this, law and order, war on drugs. As John Ehrlichman, he said, what really, he said, we were getting flack from black people, the civil rights movement, and hippies, the anti-war movement. And you couldn't outlaw being black or being a hippie, but you could outlaw drugs and use that to shatter their communities. I'm paraphrasing. You can look up Eric Ehrlichman's quote, but it's relatively famous. It's one of the most cynical and vicious uses of culture for political purposes. But, this is a regular thing on health care. Well, actually, to start off with abortion. Republicans don't talk about abortion. They talk about life and murder when they're talking about abortion. I mean, Democrats have answered with choice, which has some resonance, but nothing like, the punch that life has. On health care, Republicans appropriated the word choice and said, with Obamacare and Bernie's, single-payer health care and stuff like that, they said, boy, you want to take away my choice of doctor? And what did the Democrats do? They talked about single payer and public options and, things that could have come from an actuarial report. People had no idea what they're talking about. When Republicans talk about small government, people picture a rugged individual freed from the strictures of government. When in fact what they mean is making government too weak to tax billionaires, regulate corporate pollution, or protect people from discrimination. But Democrats never really met this with the full force of what LBJ and FDR did, which is the meme of a government that works for all. This is the contrast to Reagan's, government is not the solution to your problems, government is the problem. The response to that should be no, what we want is a government that works for everybody, not just for the billionaires, not just for the very wealthy, not just for the military-industrial complex and the giant monopolistic corporations and the Republican politicians who take their bribes. FDR understood that we don't want less government or more government. We want government that's effective. And that's a cultural message, not a policy paper. And Democrats have largely surrendered that ever since the wonky days of Jimmy Carter. Republicans say tax relief, and suddenly taxes are a disease that you have to be liberated from. Democrats could have been saying, what FDR used to say. This is a verbatim quote from Franklin Roosevelt. Quote, taxes are what we pay for civilized society. Too many individuals, however, want civilization at a discount. Right. Why aren't Democrats saying this? Republicans say red tape. Democrats talk about regulation. Actually, when Republicans condemn red tape, what they want to do is do away with every rule that is protecting you from being poisoned, cheated, or injured. Republicans say freedom, and people see flags and the national anthem. Democrats talk about programs and safety nets. Same thing with guns. Republicans use the word freedom and fight tyranny to talk about guns. Democrats could have framed gun control quite differently. They could have talked about the freedom from being shot at school, the freedom of being afraid at the grocery store, the freedom from the constant terror that your child might not come home. That's a freedom that resonates with ordinary people. On immigration, Republicans talk about secure borders and sovereignty. Democrats talk about pathways to citizenship. Republicans make it about survival of the nation. Democrats make it about paperwork. I mean, education has become another cultural battlefield. Republicans are pushing parents' rights and book bans to protect our children. The cultural high ground should be every child has the right to learn the truth. Every parent should have the right to send their child to school without fear of censorship. In every case, I mean, it wasn't always this way. During the New Deal and during the Great Society, Democrats owned the culture wars. FDR didn't talk about the Securities and Exchange Commission. He talked about saving capitalism from itself and restoring faith in America and freedom from want and fear. Lyndon Johnson didn't talk about Medicaid and Medicare as programs. This was a great society where people could live with dignity. I mean, if Democrats need to, want to win again, they have to stop ceding the cultural battlefield to Republicans and start talking about these things in ways that actually are effective, that are rooted in cultural conversations. Republicans learned from Gramsci and turn this into dog whistle slogans and memes that bypass reason. And the closest Democrats have come in recent years is Obama's hope and change. And that kind of faded when we didn't see the change. Democrats need to get their act together. They can do it. But they have to realize culture is where democracy lives or dies.